Hi everyone, thanks for watching. I'm Lauren from Guthrie and Ganny, and in this video I'm going to be sharing with you my top tips for sewing and working with silk fabrics to make some really beautiful garments. And it might be that you've been put off sewing with silk before. Maybe it's because it tends to be a more pricier fabric and you're worried about cutting into it and making a mistake. Or maybe it's just because some types of silk fabric can really slip around all over the place and be quite hard to control or trickier to control. So it might be that that's put you off as well. But hopefully hearing my top tips will give you the confidence you need to give it a go, because sewing and wearing silk is really, really special, and it's a nice little addition to add to your dressmaking repertoire. So this video does go alongside a blog post where I'll link to different types of silk fabric that we sell in my shop, Guthrie and Ganny, and then I've also listed out all of the tips and hints in there as well. So depending on what way you learn, you might find it useful to have a little read of that and have a look at the pictures too. So first of all, I want to chat a little bit about the different types of silk that you can get, because the silk fibre itself can be woven and finished and sort of processed into different types of silk fabric that actually behave a little bit differently or have different characteristics to them. So we've got a couple of different silks in the shop. The one that I've got here is a silk satin. It's a Liberty one, and it's got almost like a sheen to it. It's very, very smooth, very, very soft, and yeah, that satin finish just has got that very kind of almost like flat sheen to it. Whereas silk crepe de chine, so we do have some silk crepes as well, it's got more of a texture to it. I think it's to do with the way that the yarn almost gets sort of twisted as it gets woven. So instead of being flat and kind of shiny, it's got more of a matte finish to it. And yeah, it tends to be like a little bit more textured. You can get silk georgette as well, which is super, super lightweight, can be quite transparent too, and very, very floaty and ethereal. We don't have any of that in the shop, but you might come across it. You can also get silk dupion as well, which tends to be a lot more sort of thicker and a bit more kind of crispy and rigid and quite slubbed as well. When I was young, my mum was a dressmaker, and she worked from home, and she used to make wedding dresses for people and bridesmaids dresses, and that type of silk fabric was really popular then. I guess it must have been back in the 90s, and it was like that really kind of like sort of quite textured silk fabric that had these kind of like thicker slubs in it. So yeah, the description of silk itself doesn't necessarily give you an indication of like the finish or the type of characteristic that the silk fabric's going to have. You need to kind of look for some other adjective that's describing the silk fabric so you know how it's going to behave and how it's going to act. Now, you might be thinking, okay, if I make something out of silk, then how am I going to launder it, or how am I going to wash it or care for it afterwards? And it's a really good question, because you're probably thinking, oh, it's an expensive fabric, I don't want to ruin it in the wash. Now, if you were to buy something made out of silk from the shops, then it's quite likely that it would just say that you had to dry clean it. And you can dry clean silk, but you can launder it at home as well if you're careful. Like, definitely don't just stick it in the washing machine and tumble dryer with all your other clothes. You can hand wash it at home with a really mild detergent. So just with lukewarm water and the mild detergent, and just sort of agitate the fabric around a little bit. Squeeze as much water out as you can. You might even want to sort of squeeze it in between a couple of towels to get out excess water as well. Or if you've got a delicate or a hand wash cycle on your machine, then you can try that as well, again with a delicate detergent in it. So I washed some of this one here, this silk, the Liberty silk one, and also some of our plain silk crepe de chine. And I just used the hand wash cycle on my machine for that. I think I set it at 20 degrees with the mild detergent. It was a lower spin than what I would regularly spin my clothes at as well. And then I just hung it up to air dry. And you can see that the fabric goes almost like a little bit sort of crinkly when it first comes out. but then you can just press it. Ideally press it from the back of the fabric if you can, and ideally using a pressing cloth as well. It just helps to protect the fabric a little bit more, stop a sort of sheen from developing, especially on the crepe ones, and make sure your iron's at a silk setting too, and then it just goes nice and smooth and flat. So you definitely do need to press it in some way before you come to cut it out, because it will make cutting out much more accurate. You can also spritz like a little bit of water on it, or if it's still slightly damp when you come to, very slightly damp when you come to press it, then that can help as well. Just to get it really lovely and nice and silky and smooth and flat before you come to cut out. Now, when it comes to cutting out, there are a few different options that you might want to consider. So it's good if you've got a type of silk that's very slippery and moving around a lot, like the silk satin. What you can do is cut it out on a single layer and cut it out on a surface where it's almost going to like grip to the surface a little bit more. So maybe if you've got a carpet, you could use that, or if you're working on a table, what you can do is use a heavier weight fabric underneath. So here I've got some denim that I put underneath it. Now you don't cut the denim. You could use like a cotton canvas as well. You could probably even use like a calico, just something that the fabric's going to like grip onto a little bit more and not slip around too much as you're cutting. If you're using scissors, can really help. So yeah, you still just cut the silk, and you would cut it, ideally really cut it on a single layer if you're doing that. The fabric underneath is just there simply to sort of help control the slipperiness of it really. Then you can cut out with scissors. If I'm cutting it out with scissors, then I'll use my micro serration sheeters, which have tiny little teeth on the blade, and they're really good for gripping slippery fabric like this, because the little teeth almost sort of grip the fabric and help keep it under control as you're cutting it. The other option is a rotary cutter and a self-healing mat. Now you have to have like quite a big mat if you're going to do this, because it's difficult to then move the mat around, because it then will move the fabric around quite a bit. But if you've got a big cutting mat and you've got a small rotary cutter, so one of the mini ones, that usually makes it easier to cut it out with a rotary cutter too. If you are going to pin it, just make sure that you have got very fine pins. So we sell some Prim extra fine pins in the shop, and they are much narrower. They're a bit longer than regular pins as well. They've got these nice glass heads on them, and make sure that they don't get mixed up with your regular pins as well. But it makes such a big difference to just gliding through the fabric. It will minimize any snagging or anything too. Okay, so when it comes to actually stitch this fabric on the sewing machine, then I would recommend that you use a Microtex needle in either a size 60 or a 70. So when I made the little pajama bottom shorts out of this fabric, I used a size 60 in my machine. It was quite hard to thread the needle, I'll admit that. I was just using regular Gutermann sew-all thread, and it took me quite a few attempts to thread the needle, because obviously the finer size 60 needle just had a smaller eye in it, so it was a bit more tricky, but I got there in the end. And I would just use like a regular stitch length. Depending on your machine, depending on the fabric, you might want to alter the tension a little bit. So you could lower the tension slightly if you feel like you're getting some puckering, but you're just going to have to do like a little test on some scraps and see how the combination of your machine and the needle is kind of handling the fabric, and see whether that's necessary or not. Now, when you come to actually start sewing the fabric, because it is very fine, it's really common for the machine to almost like eat that little first bit of fabric, or it kind of gets caught a little bit, especially when you come to do the reverse. There's a couple of things you can try to get around that. You can either make sure that you've got long thread tails in the top and bottom thread, and kind of pull those threads taut as you start sewing. So once the needle's in the fabric, if you pull on those threads, it just holds some tension in the fabric and stops it getting stuck on the spot. And then it just means that it's going to feed in a little bit easier. The other thing that you can do as well to get it started is use some really fine tissue paper. So if you've ordered fabric from us, then we always wrap it in really fine tissue paper. And if you get like a little scrap of that, and just, you can actually sew your whole seam with tissue paper on it if you wanted to. I found I didn't need to, but it does really help at the start of like a seam when you're at the edge of the fabric. if you just have it underneath, and then as you stitch, it's kind of like the tissue paper just holds some stability in the fabric. So it means that you can do your little reverse and then sew on, and you're all good and you're fine. It doesn't get eaten at the top, and then you literally just, it's like, then it becomes like a perforation, because the needle going through the tissue paper makes lots of little holes, of course. So then you can just really easily tear it away afterwards. Now, if you're making something with silk that is a top and the pattern instructions suggest you to do some stay stitching, then you might find that it's quite tricky to do that. It's generally tricky to do stay stitching on any lightweight fabric, even if it was like a viscose or something. So what can really help with that is what is called forming tape interfacing. This is something we sell in the shop. It's from Prim. It comes in black and white. At the time of filming this, we don't have any white. There's been a bit of a shortage of some certain Prim products, but more will be on the way eventually. But here I'm using some of the sort of, it's called anthracite. It's like a kind of charcoaly colour. I probably would have chosen white ordinarily, but we didn't have any, and I wanted to show you what it was like. Basically, it's like an iron-on woven interfacing that's got a chain stitch through it that effectively means it's like you're ironing on the stay stitching rather than having to stitch through the fabric itself. So when you come to actually put it on, you put it on the wrong side of the fabric. You just need to make sure and check that your fabric is the same shape as your paper pattern that you cut out. It's really easy for it to get distorted, and then you just want to iron it on. So I didn't use a pressing cloth here because I wanted to be able to see what I was doing, but I was trying to be really careful and like just use the edge of the iron to just sew on the forming tape interfacing. So you just sew that right onto the edge of the fabric, and then because it's very lightweight, it doesn't make the fabric stiff at all, but it does just make it have that stitch. So it means that your neckline isn't going to stretch out at all. So yeah, it's a really good alternative to stay stitching. In terms of seam finishes, then I would highly recommend a French seam when it comes to silk. I mean, if you're going to sew something with silk, it's going to be really special and you're going to be taking your time. And sewing with a French seam can just make the garment feel even more exquisite and professional on the inside. And French seams are surprisingly easy to do because you just need a regular sewing machine, and it's almost effectively like you're sewing the seam twice. So you just sew it with the wrong sides facing first of all, with a really narrow seam allowance, trim any sort of fluffiness, press the seam allowances to one side, and then press the fabric so it's right sides facing and sew it again. Basically what happens is all the raw edges get totally enclosed, so it's really good to minimize fraying as well. And it just looks really neat on the inside because you don't see any raw edges. You see this kind of little flap of fabric, but you know, it looks really nice and clean and slick and subtle. So I would recommend French seams all the way where you can when you're sewing with silk. And then when it comes to hemming, one really nice option is doing a baby hem. So this is like a really fine narrow turned hem that you can do without using a narrow hem foot. You're just going to be using like a regular foot on your sewing machine. So what you have to do first of all is sew a line of stitching that is just below where your hem allowance is. So say on your pattern your hem allowance is like an inch, then you would sew just like very slightly below that. So on the pattern that I was sewing here, I sewed it at about 1 centimetre because I wanted to try and keep as much length in my little pyjama shorts as I could. So you just sew that all the way around, and then you use that line of stitching as a guide to press it to the wrong side of the fabric. And then once you've pressed it that way, you're going to sew again. So you sew like really close to the folded edge, so like a few millimeters or like 1/8 of an inch. So you go all the way around, and then that extra kind of flap of fabric, you just need to cut that off. So if you've got some duck-billed scissors, it can be useful to use them here. So just trim that off as close to the stitch line as you can get it, really. And then you're going to press it over again. So all the stitching will be on the inside now, and then you do one last pass of sewing all the way around. So what you end up seeing is one line of stitching on the outside, and you'll see two lines of stitching on the inside, but you get this really, really narrow baby hem, which just looks really delicate and dainty, which I think pairs with the silk fabric really nicely. Now, in terms of what to make with silk fabric, if you're still sort of building up your confidence, then picking something simple is going to be the best option. So what I've been making in the little clips that I've been showing you are the Tilly and the Buttons Jamie pyjamas, and I just made shorts version because it obviously didn't use as much fabric, and it meant I could have a really beautiful little pair of pyjama shorts to wear in the summertime. And then I also made the True Bice Ogden cami as well. That was the other little sample that you saw me sewing. I am actually wearing those things at the moment because as I'm filming I'm still pregnant and they don't totally fit me right now. But I've made these patterns before, so I just made the size that I normally am. But hopefully you get the idea anyway. Other really nice pattern options are the Chalk and Notch Victory Tank. That is another nice sort of cami style top. You've got some strap options there too. The Grain Line Hadley top I think would be another really lovely one, or the Closet Core Celio top would be nice as well, especially in those sleeves. There's the Sew House 7 Remy Raglan, again just a nice simple one, and that raglan sleeve is nice and easy to put into. The Assembly Line Cuff top would be another really good option, or the Chalk and Notch Aria top. But yeah, I wanted to go for the shorts because sleeping in silk is really nice. It feels very luxurious, and if you've got any scraps left over, you can do what I did and make a little eye mask with it as well, which is really cute. It feels very luxurious. So I hope you have found all of those hints and tips useful and you feel a little bit more confident about giving silk a go. I totally get it, it is scary because you think, I just really don't want to ruin this beautiful fabric, but the only way to learn and get more confident is just to give it a go. So I hope that this has inspired you. So remember, there is a blog post that goes alongside this video. It's got everything summarised in there, along with lots of links to the fabric and patterns that I mentioned as well. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, then just remember to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on my next video. And I'll see you next time. Bye!